What's up, guys? Um, Josh here, and I am here today to talk about my Rotary Miata, nicknamed Spicy Banana, 1995 NA Miata. Um, a lot of you, if you're watching this video, are probably looking for details on how the build is done and how to do it yourself. So hopefully you can glean some info about how to do this, and sit back and I'll give you a rundown of what most of the stuff is that I've done so far. So, quick side note, I don't like gatekeeping. I'm an open book for just about anything that's done to the car. So if you have any questions, leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to respond if I know the answer or not. So, gonna get started here with the outside of the car. As you can see, I have a very sleek CCP Fab Fastback hardtop with a 9 Lives Racing air dam, which will eventually lead to also having their wing. The color of the car is actually John Deere yellow, but I formally have renamed it as Bitchin' Yellow. The wheels are Koenig decograms, 15x9 plus 35 with a 225 45 15 Toyo. The Toyos that are on there are technically the rain version, or I believe what is the rain version of the R888. They're a 200 treadwear tire, and at the time of me purchasing them, they were the cheapest option available for me to get a new tire, just to get some data on the car with a new set of tires. The ones that were originally I was testing on the car were 3 years old, and so they had been heat cycled a bunch of times, and they were corded. A couple of them were pretty close to being corded. Moving on from there, the engine bay kind of looks complicated, but it is actually a very, very simple setup. It's carbed and everything else. But starting with the radiator, it's a universal Chevy setup inlet outlet circle track rad from Griffin radiators with a factory thermostat that I gutted and backfilled the warm-up loop on the engine. So it should help with cavitation, since there's no pressure on the head of the pump, so it shouldn't have a problem with turning the factory pump really fast without cavitating. There's also a couple of Mishimoto fans, even though they aren't the greatest reliability wise, but when the car is moving, the fans are never on. Next, the oil cooler that's on here is just about the same size as the radiator. It is a circle track, or something that you would commonly find in like a pro late model circle track race car. I don't know the brand of it. I got it used in a lot of used parts that I bought, but I do have it hooked up to an improved racing oil thermostat that opens up at 165. I've never seen the oil get up above 180, so oil is not going to be the issue that kills the motor. The engine is technically a factory S4 RX-7 keg, which I bought peripheral port housings for. They're used, and they appear to be a Racing Beat set, along with a 58 IDA Genberg carb that I talked about earlier. The engine also has the Pineapple Racing full-length dowel pins, the one that's solid and the one that's hollow for the oil galley, along with an LRB baffle plate to help keep the aeration of the oil down when it falls back down into the oil pan. I'm still using the factory CAS to control the ignition through an Elite 1500 that we'll talk about a little bit later, and also RX-8 coils, since they have a very small dwell time specifically designed for rotary motors. A lot of people go with LS stuff, but the RX-8s I could get cheaper, and they're brand new, and they're a good brand. They're NGKs, so I shouldn't have any problems with them. Back onto the CAS. I decided to stay with the CAS due to trying to keep the cost down on the car, and since I don't plan on spinning the motor very quickly, I plan on shifting it at about 8,500 with a rev limiter at 9K. I shouldn't have an issue with RPM wander at that limit. If I was revving it to 10 or 11,000 because I had a whole bunch of other stuff done to the motor, then I would. But going for reliability, not not super duper high performance. You add all this together, and the car should be making somewhere between 250 300 horsepower. I'm leaning probably closer to 250, but based on what I've read online, it should be in that ballpark. I haven't had the car dynoed. With that, moving along, the engine actually sits behind the steering rack, and it puts the center line of the engine behind the center line of the front wheels, making it, technically speaking, a mid-engine car, although it's a mid-engine front car, although this is all made possible through trimming the firewall, along with using a mountless V8 Roadster subframe. And this also helps with the mid-engine part of the car by saving a few pounds off the nose over the factory subframe. I know a lot of people are going to ask this question, and I haven't fully disclosed it yet, but I run 1 ounce per gallon plus 1 two-stroke premix in my car with 93 octane. So if I put 10 gallons in the car, I put 11 ounces of premix. That's just so that, you know, if it's actually closer to like 10 and a half or something like that, you always have more than what it actually reads. The chassis itself is stiffened up with a cage that I built myself from Miata Cage, which is like the go-to spec Miata roll cage, along with a 5X Racing drop floor pan. Also, that I can pass the broomstick test. If you don't know what the broomstick test is, you have to be able to hold a broomstick with your helmet on, sitting in the seat. You have to be able to pass a broomstick above your helmet without it sticking above the roll cage. This is all coupled with the mechanical grip side of things, which is handled by Exita coilovers, 100 front, 500 in the rear. They're not the remote canister shocks. I went with just the standard coilovers because they big money, and this is balling on a budget. So hands down, some of the best coilovers that I've ever driven on, without me even hardly beating on the car yet. You can instantly tell that they are worth every dollar that you have. Along with I also purchased the 1.125 Racing Beat front sway bar, the hollow one, and just the standard Super Miata rear sway bar. The interior is set up with a Bimarco grip 2 seat with an AIM MXS 1.2 data logger version. Big difference there between just the street version and the data logger version, and that is all getting funneled the Haltech data over CAN bus. So everything hits the Haltech, and then I just have CAN bus over to the AIM. So eventually I will have, load cells and shock pots, linear pots, so that I can measure spring travel and everything else along with the car, and a few other things like ABS tone rings on all 4 wheels so that I can see slip angle and so on and so forth. But that's like down the road, version 2 of the car probably, because all that I just said is well into thousands of dollars worth of hardware and equipment and so on and so forth. The Haltech that I mentioned earlier also has a dual wideband so that I can monitor front and rear rotor AFRs independently. I know the go-to thing is thermocouples, but thermoresistors, the ones that you stick in the exhaust that measure exhaust gas temp. I prefer AFRs because 1, OBD2s read faster, and 2, I don't plan on ever running enough ignition in this thing to have to worry about exhaust gas temps, because I'm going to keep the AFRs deep into the 12s, even though it's naturally aspirated. All the 12 volt in the car is controlled by a 12 volt lithium ion battery from NOCO that weighs less than 5 pounds, and that runs up to an Elish Electronics Pro 12 relay board. It's a very simple setup. If need be, I can go over the wiring in the car, and it's a completely separate video, but it's pretty easy how it's set up. Go ahead, along with that in the interior, go ahead and replace the gauge cover. you don't have one, don't buy a used one. This one's from Treasure Coast. They're only a few bucks more than buying a used one offline, and the used one is guaranteed to break instantly. So you might as well just buy a brand new remake. It snapped in there perfectly, just like it was a brand new one from Mazda. And then the harness for everything that controls the car electronics-wise is a custom-built one that I did, starting with the factory Haltech universal harness that came with the 1500. I am not an electronics person by any means. I probably could have downsized every single wire that I've used in the harness several gauges, but most of the harness is 14 and 16 gauge with all the sensors at 18 gauge. That's just peace of mind for me to make sure that the resistance and everything, I'm not worried about stuff going on. And this also isn't like a primo super top of the line concentrical twist harness for maximum motorsports and lightweightness. So I would call it probably a, what do the wiring gurus call them? A club sport harness, I think is what they call them. Yeah, something like that. But with that, this is pretty much the end of the build. There's a few things that I left out, but it's just gloss over stuff at this point. Happy brapping.